This is our NAIR Pilot and CU RMAC webinar series. We are excited to have everyone here for our next CU RMAC webinar. We'll have about 45 minutes for presentation and about 10 to 15 minutes afterwards for a Q&A. So please submit your questions via the Q&A button in Zoom, and all of the questions will be answered at the end of the presentation. This session will be recorded, so if you'd like to go back and rewatch, the video should be posted on the NAIR Pilots YouTube channel within the next 2 weeks. Today's presentation is Should I Be Afraid of AI? Given by Dr. Shelley Knuth, Assistant Vice Chancellor for Research Computing at CU Boulder. And Shelley, if you are ready, the stage is yours.
Awesome, thank you. Let me share my screen here. All right. Welcome everyone. Yeah, so I'm really glad to be here to talk about whether or not you should be afraid of AI. And just as a spoiler alert, I'm not going to tell you whether or not you should be afraid. That's kind of a decision that's up to you, but I'm going to present some ideas and some options and perhaps even some alternative ways of thinking and see where that gets us. All right, so let's start out by asking ourselves a few questions. So, have you ever asked yourself, are you afraid that you could lose your job because it could be done faster, better, or more efficiently? Do you feel like you have no control over decisions that are being made anymore? Maybe. Do you wonder if your own personal data is being used against you? I'd ask how many folks have thought of one of these things before, but you can internally raise your hands. Interestingly enough, though, none of these questions actually have anything to do with AI. So the first one, are you afraid that you could lose your job? That might be an ambitious coworker who, comes in and has some new ideas of, what to do that maybe you who've been doing this job for a long time, haven't necessarily thought of. Do you feel like you have no control over decisions that are being made anymore? It's kind of advertising. One thing I like to point out is I really love, and since this is being recorded, I won't share the exact candy, but it's a new candy that's come out that I really enjoy. And, just when I feel like I'm getting over it, I see an advertisement of it, or I'm in the grocery store and I see it on a shelf, and it makes me think of it, and I'm like, oh gosh, I want that. And, there's a trigger mechanism there, right, that can make you feel that way. Then you wonder if your personal data is being used anymore or being used against you, I should say. Well, this could be your grocery store loyalty card, right? So if you start making purchases and you use your loyalty card to get discounts, suddenly it starts to know, what you like to buy. And occasionally I still use the pickup from grocery stores, and I'll go in there and I'll say, well, this is what you bought last time. And I'm like, don't judge my food choices. This is what, I like to eat. But at the same time, it's really nice because I can click, click, click and do it quickly. So all this to say is that, these things perhaps initially you thought that they were about AI, and they could have been about AI, but they also could be about all kinds of things that we do in our day-to-day lives that have nothing to do with AI whatsoever. So humans maybe are afraid of a lot of things, and this isn't a judgment on us. It's more just, I mean, this is wired into who we are as people, and making sure that we are protecting ourselves from any kind of issue that may threaten our safety. And so, a few things that people have really been afraid of in the past are, first of all, electricity. I mean, there was a time in our lives where electricity was not a thing. And when it first came about and people were getting used to the idea of this concept, they were really concerned that it could kill people and that it could cause fires. Could it do that? Sure. So, it was a fear that was out there. The printing press was another one. People were afraid that it would allow folks to share quote unquote dangerous ideas, whatever, somebody had decided was a dangerous idea. They were also concerned that it could undermine authority. Could it do those things? Potentially. I love to throw out rock and roll. So people were afraid of rock and roll at one point. This wasn't really a mainstream set of music, until certain folks such as Elvis came along and made it more prevalent. And Elvis, in fact, his nickname was Elvis the Pelvis. And there was a time early in his career where they wouldn't show him from I think it was waist down because they didn't want to instigate promiscuity or rebellion. So, this was a fear that we had. The internet was another big fear. I don't know how many of you on the call were around before there was an internet that was at least, you know, well available to the general public. But I was. And, the internet became really a thing probably my late high school, early college, and people were really afraid that it would cause social collapse and moral decay and job loss. And does it? I mean, maybe. So you have to think about these things. And the question isn't so much we shouldn't or should be afraid of these things, but what are we going to do with the fear, and what do we need to do to assess whether or not that fear is worth the risk? So if we think a little bit about that concept, and let's use electricity as an example. These are just some kind of steps that I've come up with. You may come up with your own kind of plan for, how you work with fear. But the first thing that I like to do is really think about, okay, what is this that's actually concerning, and what is it that's maybe hype or maybe a little bit blown out of proportion? And then once you've made that assessment, you need to understand how to avoid disaster and then take steps to avoid disaster from that. And then finally, you have to assess whether or not it's worth the risk. So let's take a look at this example of electricity. So first we need to determine what's concerning and what's hype. You could die from a large jolt of electricity, or, a large jolt of electricity could cause, fire or some other issue. So that's a risk, and that's probably not hype. I mean, if you go out and touch a large voltage live wire, you're going to be in trouble in some form depending on how large that voltage is. So if we understand then how to avoid disaster and take steps to do that, we say, okay, well, we're going to avoid direct contact with large voltages and not touch those large wires or stick forks into outlets or whatever the case may be, because those are good ways to mitigate that risk. And then we have to assess, well, is it worth the risk? Back when electricity was first coming online, people may have thought, well, it's a little bit, it's not worth the risk, but there were probably some people that did. And here we are today. I couldn't be bringing you this webinar without electricity. I couldn't do my job without electricity. So, for me, it's worth the risk. I just make sure that, should I come across a live wire, I don't touch it, or, take risks to make sure that I don't come in contact with such large voltages. So these are some of the things that we're going to talk about today, specifically around certain AI fears. And these are a few things that have come up when people commonly think about, well, should I or shouldn't I be afraid of AI? And we're going to use this methodology and step through each one of these to really think deeply about each of these issues. So the first here is loss of control. Then we have job displacement, bias and fairness, misinformation, loss of privacy, the rise of the robots, and then a lack of accountability. And then at the very end, we'll talk a little bit about, well, what should we do next, and what should I kind of keep my eyes on? So let's start with the first one here, loss of control. So the fear here is what happens if AI systems make decisions that we don't understand, or even worse, we can't override. So an example of this could be self-driving cars, just to give kind of a quote unquote real world example. So the theory here is, you have a self-driving car. That car could, it's going to make certain decisions about how to drive, and it could make very bad decisions. And if a human who is presumably at the wheel of the car cannot override those decisions, that car could get in an accident causing harm to the person in the vehicle or to people outside of the vehicle, whether they're pedestrians or other vehicles or whatnot. Autonomous weapons, kind of the same idea. If you have weapons that are able to be shot off autonomously and you can't override that, well, that could be concerning. Is this hype, or is it something that we really have to pay attention to? And I would say, I think that maybe it's a little bit of both, but the idea behind this and why this is a fear is because of something called the black box. So it's mildly unclear, I'd say, and how these systems are truly coming to the final decision that they are coming to. Now we understand kind of the backbone there and how, the code is written and the data is getting ingested and whatnot, but each one of these models are being trained on different types of data. And so how it gets from point A to point B is a little bit of a black box to us. And so there's some concern there, because if you don't exactly understand how a system is making a decision, then you can't necessarily understand how to change that decision. So what can we do to mitigate the risk? We can do something called human in the loop. Human in the loop is this concept of basically making sure that humans are part of the process and part of either the design, or making sure that there are abilities to override or to sort of step in at some point. The best example I can give for this is autopilot. So perhaps many of us have been on an airplane before and understand the concept of, you have generally, depending on what kind of plane you're in, if it's a large commercial aircraft, you would have two pilots in the front. And there are times when the pilots are the plane is under manual control, and then there's times when it's under autopilot. And if it's under autopilot, though, the pilots are able to take over the controls if they need to. Um, so again, the same concept would apply to a self-driving car. If it's on autopilot, making sure that, a human could step in and say, geez, this car is going to hit this particular thing. I like to throw out well, I think that's a good example, but maybe we'll leave it for another time, for a TV show that I enjoy. But if you take a look at the flip side of this, so when we're trying to assess if it's worth the risk or not, one of the things, just like electricity, right? We have to see, well, why would we want to have this? What's the advantage? And the flip side is arguably, more people have died from human errors while driving than necessarily computers. So, I don't have statistics in front of me, but all the ways, some of the common ways that accidents are caused are from humans driving too fast, or um, sometimes you have drunk drivers or drivers under the influence of some other substance, or you have people who are texting and driving, or you have people that are too inexperienced for whatever condition it is that they're driving in. And so these can cause a lot of issues, whereas, you have a computer and you have certain things that you have to be paying attention to. But at the same time, you have humans who, I mean, I would argue I can't control anybody else's decisions either, except for mine. So is that worth the risk? Again, that's, a call you have to make for yourself. But, these are the kinds of things to think about as we're assessing this. So let's look at this one, job displacement. Will AI make the human worker obsolete? This one I hear all the time. I hear this at work. I hear this in personal conversations. I hear it at parties. I hear it all the time. People are really concerned that AI will make humans obsolete in some capacity. Is this hype, or is this a thing to be concerned about? I don't think it's hype. I think that it's hard to argue that AI will probably take some jobs that particularly are more on the automated side. Um, and so that's something to be dealt with. I could argue too that, much like the internet that we talked about earlier, or even electricity, any of these things took certain jobs away because a new technology or a new skill or a new method or whatever the case may be came into being. But they also maybe created jobs. So, you have to take a look at that. What might be a way to mitigate um, this concern for job displacement? I mean, from a personal standpoint, I would argue that upskilling is probably your best way to mitigate the risk of your job disappearing due to AI. When I gave this talk last time and in that workshop, we had a really great career panel, and one of our panelists said, and I'm paraphrasing here, AI is not going to take your job. It's the human who knows how to use AI tools better than you who will take your job. And I think that that was a really great way of spelling this out. So learning what you can about AI, thinking about, is your job one of those that are truly on the chopping block? Well, what do I need to do to upskill to maybe move into a role that can help support where this environment's moving toward? Again, if we take a look at the flip side as we're assessing whether or not it's worth the risk, you know, AI can handle some repetitive tasks, and in some ways it can help you focus on creativity. And I would, some folks will say, well, AI is going to ruin creativity, and depending, it might. But just to give a personal example, in some of the workshop materials that I've been creating for some of the things that we've provided recently, I've leveraged ChatGPT to help me sit down and figure out, okay, well, how do I want to word this in a way that's going to make sense? How do I want to frame this? And it has reduced that time for me by so much that then I am allowed to sit and think more in depth about how I creatively want to approach providing this information, or if there's certain um, issues where I need to, provide some kind of verbiage for something at work, and I just sort of type it out and I say, okay, this is just straight from my brain. And instead of spending a bunch of time trying to figure out how to word it in a more professional way, I can leverage AI tools to help me do that. Um, we did an AI workshop back in April, and we wanted to give some folks materials ahead of time for learning about high performance computing. And I've been in the high performance computing field for a long time. I've taught a lot of introduction to HPC sessions. I'm confident that I could put something together for these folks, but it's going to take me some time to do that. And even if I were leveraging things that are out there, that still takes time to find that and then make sure it's in the form that I want to present it. Whereas what I was able to do is work with ChatGPT and put some things in there and fiddle with it a bit. It would spit some things out and it would say, that's not quite what I want. I want to focus on this. And then I put it into Google Notebook LM and was able to create a podcast that was maybe 6 minutes long. And then people are, able to do what I wanted to accomplish, which is ingest that information. And that freed me to think about, gee, maybe offering it in a podcast would have been great. So I was able to think about that and then think about, other things in terms of that workshop and the creativity. So, is it worth the risk? Again, I'd say that AI is going to create some jobs and there will be some loss. So again, that's something that you have to decide for yourself. Bias. This is another big one that comes up a lot. And, it's something that we really need to think about. So the fear here is, will AI reinforce or worsen existing inequalities? And so a few examples of this is really, so we have AI that's trained on bias data that could make discriminatory decisions. So for example, facial recognition is traditionally not very great for individuals who are not Caucasian. The algorithms struggle on that. If you type into certain AI tools something like, can you create an image of a medical doctor for me. It might create an image of a um, person who doesn't necessarily reflect everyone that is, has that profession, right? It might and do that overwhelmingly. So, for example, it might produce more photos of white males than it would of, another gender or another race. Um, Policy decisions can then start being made from this data that the AI tool is ingesting. For example, mortgage loans are a good one. We, in the past, in the United States, have had a history of, um, certain situations where we are making decisions based on who is a good uh, credit risk and who isn't, and some of the data that can go into that can be biased, and then that can then get reflected in the decisions that the AI tool is producing because the AI tool is just working off of the data that you gave it. This is something that is definitely not hype. Bias is a big thing in AI, and trying to make sure that we're dealing with that bias in an effective and productive way is super important. How would we mitigate something like this? I mean, this is a difficult problem to resolve. And it requires, I think, a, a multi-pronged approach. Um, the first thing is that we need to make sure that we have diverse and representative data of whatever it is that we are trying to help the AI tool decide. If you have, and it's not, I want to stress this, that the AI tool itself is not biased. It's a computer. It runs off of ones and zeros and math and logic. What's biased is the data that us humans have collected and are feeding it. And so if you are able to pivot to make the AI tool ingest and train on data that is more widespread and not just focused on a single group of individuals, then the answers that it's going to give you are going to inherently just be better. So paying a really good attention to the data that we have that these tools are ingesting is really important. Interestingly enough, AI can be used to detect bias in AI, and so there's detection tools out there. And then, this is definitely where we have to make sure that humans are paying attention and really checking, gee, is this facial recognition tool only finding a certain type of community of folks that, maybe isn't completely correct. So, these are some things to consider. On the flip side, as we're considering the risk, again, I would argue that computers are inherently more objective than humans are. I mean, we're wired to all have a bias. Every one of us has a bias. I have one, you have one. It's, about awareness to that bias. And that bias, as, maybe before awareness was known about it or whatnot, that gets reflected in the data that we're providing it. If we provide it with better data, the computer, is not going to be biased. So I would argue that if this is a thing that we keep working on, we should be able to fix our own problem. Is it worth the risk, though? Again, that's something that you have to think about. All right. So this is my favorite side of this talk. So misinformation is another thing that comes up a lot, and I think we deal with this in some form in our day-to-day lives. And so the fear here is, what if we can't trust what we see, hear, or read anymore? So, there's a few things that come up around this. There's deep fakes, things that you're seeing on social media. Are they real? Are they fake? And deep fakes in particular can be kind of concerning, not kind of, quite a bit concerning, particularly if you had, say, a world leader who was somebody created a deep fake of them, and that world leader, made some kind of declaration that was pretty impactful. That's concerning. And if people don't know that that's a deep fake, they could take that and then run with it. But perhaps on a lighter example, so there's an individual on TikTok, and he does these these videos of Tom Cruise, and his page is Deep Tom Cruise. And so that is not Tom Cruise. This person, he looks a bit like Tom Cruise. He does not sound really like Tom Cruise, but he will use AI to produce videos that really look like Tom Cruise. And so let's take a look at this one. This is again not Tom Cruise, but looks like Tom Cruise. So, I mean, that kind of looks like Tom Cruise, doesn't it? And there's other videos out there where he's talking. I watched one, you can find him on his page, where like he walks into what looks like a press conference or some kind of event where the paparazzi are there, and he like falls and makes a big leap, and it could be the kind of thing that gets reported out. And there's also a few things on there where there were deep fakes created of him dating Paris Hilton, and this is where this came about in maybe more mainstream media. It's concerning, right? Because and the AI videos are getting a lot better. I mean, it wasn't that long ago that you would look at an AI video and think, okay, I can tell that that's fake. In this one, I think you can kind of tell that it's auto-generated in some way, but it's pretty good too. So, is this hype? I don't think so. I think that this is something that we really need to be paying attention to, because as I said, here it's Tom Cruise dancing on a lawn in front of a nice looking house, but in other spaces it could be world leaders. There's a deep fake out there of Obama, President Obama, who made some declarations that wasn't him. It was somebody who was doing an impression of him, so sort of sounded like him, but then they generated the video. Now that was from a few years ago, and you could kind of tell it was AI generated, but it was still fairly decent. So what do we want to do to think about this and mitigate this? Digital literacy is huge. You have to really be paying attention these days to what it is that you're seeing on the internet, because you can't just, you never really should have done this, but I think today it's even more important, making sure that you're understanding what it is that you're seeing, and whether or not something may not be what you think it is. Another way to do this is for the platforms that are offering these pieces of information, that there could be standards set that require accountability of some form, or provenance standards, so watermarks or things along those lines. On the flip side, information, it's out there, and AI helps enable us to get even more information than perhaps we could have ever had before. AI can help us to detect fake content. It can help us to build fact-checking tools to help with these things. And so, there's a lot of different ways that we can really use AI to our advantage while still taking advantage of all of the information that you can get. I mean, just using things again like ChatGPT to help assess information and then formulate that in a different way can really provide a lot for an individual. So again, is it worth the risk? I don't know. We get to watch Tom Cruise dancing, so maybe it is. Okay, loss of privacy. The fear is AI is watching me, listening to me, tracking me, like kind of all the time. Some specific fears around this are the government tracking people with AI surveillance, advertiser targeting. If any of you have ever, I had a conversation with a friend recently about her buying a couch, and then I was getting a lot of ads for buying couches on my social media feeds. So, clearly people are paying attention to these things. And that's not even necessarily to do with AI. That's just your phone listening to you. So, you know, this is a thing, and loss of privacy. Again, I would say too. There's been concerns a long time. This is not the first idea of government surveillance. Keeping an eye on its citizens and enacting certain things that may impact them. And is this hype? Again, from the random ad example, I don't believe it is. This is a thing that we have to actually be paying attention to. Some ways that we could mitigate the risk could be to enact stronger data protection laws, or you and I could opt out of our surveillance. For example, uh, if you have a phone and it has an AI assistant on it, and you say, hey, AI assistant, that phone's listening for you to say these things, you could turn it off. Now, is it still listening? Maybe. If I turn it off and I'm in a room full of 100 people, the chances that everybody have that turned off is probably pretty small. So it's, theoretically still listening and learning from me. But that is a thing that you can opt out of. Um, if you have a streaming service, or again, with the grocery store loyalty card, you can opt out of those things so that it's not collecting your information at all. And these are some ways that you could mitigate that. On the flip side, it is kind of nice to have the ability to add things to grocery lists with an AI assistant, or to, Colorado's just enacted a law where you can't be touching your phone at all while you're driving. So, it's great to be able to say things like, hey, AI assistant, can you, do the thing? Um, and AI can also help identify and block abusive surveillance as these things arise. So, again, is it worth the risk? I think that's a decision, for you to decide. Okay, so Rise of the Robots, the Terminator for us 80s children. The idea here is, could AI eventually destroy humanity intentionally or not? And the idea here is, if we generate some kind of super intelligent being that's misaligned with humanity's values, whatever those values could be. And so, of course, there's the movie The Terminator with Arnold Schwarzenegger from back in the day, where um, he had to take a look at, he was a robot and had to he had a mission to eliminate the mother of a person who would in the future cause major issues for humanity. And so the concern is, well, if the robot, in this case, Arnold Schwarzenegger, is off doing something that nobody can control, and is misaligned with humanity, is that an issue? Um, and is this hype or not? I mean, in theory, if you asked AI, let's say we had a robot in the room with us, and you said to that robot, I need you to get as many paper clips as you can by any means. I mean, the only thing that that robot knows is that it has to collect as many paper clips as humanly possible, and it's going to do whatever it can, including perhaps killing people, to get those paper clips. If humans aren't involved in that by saying something like, programming in it or whatever to say, hey, maximize the number of paper clips, but maybe don't do these things, it might still get creative enough to do other things. But maybe that helps. So, I don't think this is a thing. I mean, I think it's a concern, but I also don't know that we're quite there yet. I think in the Terminator, I think we're getting close to when the Terminator went to the future, I believe. It's been a while since I've seen this movie, but and I don't know that we're quite at the point where we're developing robots that are able to think and feel. So, this is one of those that's kind of a little bit in between, I'd say. How would we mitigate something like this? More research, more development, understanding more about, what kind of code and programming are we putting to these robots, and what kind of data are they training on? On the flip side, you could have robots who come into existential risks like pandemics that are able to help people sort of resolve, these big harmful situations. So again, is it worth the risk? And then finally, we have a lack of accountability. So basically, who's responsible when AI gets it wrong? These days, if you are interested, and even if you go into certain doctor's offices, this could be the case too, but you could get a radiology report from a CT scan you have and throw it into Chat GPT, and it will say, I'm not a doctor, but here's what I think this is and what could possibly be going on here. Let's say that you're in your doctor's office and the radiology reports are AI generated based on certain patterns that this is probably cancer and this might not be, kind of a thing. And let's say it's wrong. Let's say it misdiagnoses. It says, hey, this thing on the report looks benign and it turns out it was malignant. Who's to blame in that situation? Is it the developer of the AI tool? Is it the hospital who is allowing these diagnoses with this AI tool? Is it the doctor who believed it? Is it the patient who didn't pursue anything further? This is really ambiguous. This is very new. This is uncharted territory. We're not sort of at the point where this has been figured out, and there certainly aren't really strong laws in place yet to sort all of these things out. Um, so, is it hype or not? I don't think it's hype, but it's not maybe as prevalent as some of the other things that are actively happening at the moment. Some things that we can look at for mitigation, adopting standards, keeping, again, these humans in the loop instead of just, somebody in the example I gave, theoretically, somebody without any kind of medical training could just deliver that information. That's probably really not the way to go about that. On the flip side, though, what could AI really do for our health? If it allows us to detect diseases long before, they're at the point where they're terminal, that could be a really big deal. Can it help develop certain methods for treating disease that would be beneficial? Again, is it worth the risk? That's up to you to decide. Okay, so these last couple slides are kind of wrapping things up in the sense of, what can we do now? So thinking about, again, overhype and misunderstanding, humans have a tendency to kind of be on the fringes of things, or they're not always necessarily in the middle. So a lot of times your brain will go to, this is way too apocalyptic, or I'm going to just inherently trust it. You don't necessarily want to default to one or the other. You want to be in the middle in some degree so that you understand each of the sides and can really make good decisions and use it for whatever it is you need to use it for effectively. Um, and I would say fear often stems from the unknown. It doesn't mean that if you know about something, the fear is gone, because sometimes you know a lot and it turns out, it's a really scary thing. But sometimes, and I would argue in the case again of AI, the more you know, the better equipped you'll be to handle whatever comes your way. But regardless of whether or not you're afraid of AI or concerned or whatever the case may be, I mean, the tools are here, the methods are here, and this technology isn't going away. It's like the internet. We can say, I'm never going to use the internet ever. This is not my thing, but the technology is still there and other people are using it. So what are you going to do to make sure that you are playing in this space effectively? And so I'd say a few things to remember. Use these tools to your advantage. You can really learn a lot of new job skills by just toying around with some of these tools in AI. I mean, a lot of them you can get access to some level for free. Or if you're at a higher ed institution, a lot of them have subscriptions to certain things. Start playing around with them. Learn what it is that you can and can't do, and learn especially what they can't do so that you can understand that AI itself isn't infallible. And don't get caught in this idea that, well, I've already missed the boat. Everybody understands about AI. Nobody, I mean, we're all here together in this, right? Sure, there are people out there who are, really advanced in developing it, but there's a ton of people who are like trying to figure out what this thing is and what they can do with it. And you don't need some sort of advanced degree to really mess around with these things. You can play around with them and learn a lot. And I would say too, another kind of comment is, again, I mentioned this, but a lot of fear comes from, again, this idea that AI robots are going to become humans. And, we're not there quite yet. It's a thing to be keeping an eye on. But, again, AI is just math, it's data, and it's compute, it's logic. Whereas, humans are much more complex than that. We think, we feel, we have empathy, we have all kinds of emotions that, computers just don't have. So, just keeping that in mind. What can you do now? Um, I would say learn some of the basics. You don't need to know how to code. That's actually one of the really brilliant things about AI. Um, you can, again, just get these tools out and start playing around with them. Take whatever training is available to you, and a lot of these trainings are free. Our team offers a lot of trainings that you can learn a lot of these tools and join in conversations with people about AI that don't necessarily have your background or your discipline. So if you're an engineer, talk to somebody from linguistics or vice versa, or whatever the case may be, because you're using the same technology, but you're approaching it with slightly different problems and slightly different concerns, and that can really help you to learn the full landscape of what's out there. Again, use AI mindfully. Don't just inherently trust it. Ask questions and challenge assumptions, and continue to learn more. And then, some questions to leave with as you're thinking about AI and your journey with it. Who's building the AI that I'm using? Is it private companies? Is it higher ed? Is that bad or good, depending? What decisions are automated? What is it that I have to be paying attention to that might be falling into this idea of, or the concept of black box? And how do we ensure AI benefits more people and how do we improve that accessibility to more AI tools? And I would say that these things go hand in hand because, again, we are the humans who develop these tools. We're the humans who are ingesting the data into these tools. We can change AI. We have the power to do that. And so, what can we do that's going to benefit more people by leveraging this tool rather than leaving it to kind of destroy everything that we've built and that we know of as humanity? And that's one thing when, folks will say things like, I'm not going to use it. I'm going to avoid it. I would say, besides the fact that it's here, the more people who know what we should be doing with AI to leverage it for good, the more that those people disappear, it's going to leave more people who want to use it for bad. And, what can we do to help this process? And again, I think that improving the accessibility to these tools, making them available to as many people as we can, really can help with this. And part of that comes in, again, with training. So, should you be afraid? Again, I can't answer that question for you, but here's what I'll say: is I think you should be cautious. I think you should be mindful, but I think you should be engaged. And I think you should remember that fear can either be paralyzing or it can be empowering. The more knowledge you have, the better informed your decisions are, and the better you can use these tools and that you can leverage them for whatever it is that you need to be leveraging them for. I personally would say be afraid of people who misuse AI, but not necessarily the technology itself, and figure out how to use that for good. Um, Again, AI is our co-pilot. It's not a replacement. And then I would say too, remember that people were afraid of all kinds of things. Calculators. I didn't even mention calculators yet. That, if again, child of the 80s, if you're if you remember, you were not allowed to use calculators in math because we needed to make sure that we understood math. And, of course, the common thing was, do you think you'll have a calculator in your pocket all the time? Well, now we do. I've already talked about the internet, Y2K, big thing. Everybody was, really freaked out about what would happen there. And they spent a lot of time learning and understanding and working to mitigate the risks. And it turned out to be, by and large, a non-issue. So I'm going to leave you with one thing here is this idea of utopia. And it's, we spend a lot of time talking about whether or not we should be afraid of AI, but let's think about the world we could be living in. So here's some things that could be happening in this world. Your doctor could catch a health issue pretty early before you even have symptoms, help catch the health issue of your loved one and mitigate it, and you or your loved one ends up living many years longer than you would have otherwise. Let's say you have a kid who's struggling in school and they're having a hard time trying to figure out how to learn about some concept, and it could be impacting their mental health. It could be impacting whether or not they get into college. And and you don't necessarily have the means to hire a tutor. Well, maybe you can get a free AI tutor to help them. Perhaps you can do things that waste less energy, your time and your energy without lifting a finger. Again, we have these tools that help us make decisions and help us deal with repetitive tasks. That sounds kind of cool. It could, again, with the repetitive tasks, help you focus on things about your job that matter and that are important to you and give you a really good sense of self and a purpose in your job rather than just, doing some of these things over and over again. You might feel safer on the road if we have autonomous driving systems rather than relying on the person, that's coming at you on the street is not looking at their phone and texting while they're driving. You could have an aging parent who lives independently longer with certain smart devices in their house that is learning about them and their tools, and it can help when maybe they run into an issue. You could also have more free time. Theoretically, we worry about, well, somebody's going to take my job. Well, what if it just makes your job more effective so that you can do your job in less time? And in theory, at least, now this may truly be utopia, you now have more free time because you're not having to spend it on these other things. And what if we had cheaper products because AI helps with efficiencies? So this is, these are some real possibilities of things that, again, on that flip side, that we could really be considering. So I'll leave it there. I will see if there's any questions. We have a few minutes, and feel free to contact me if you have any questions. And yeah, thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much again, Shelley. We have a handful of questions, and if anyone else has questions, please use that Q&A button below. We do have a question from Theo, which is their question pertains to the decreased demand for junior roles. They're mostly referring to software engineering here. What do you think that might mean for undergraduates, people coming into the workforce with AI?
Honestly, I mean, you might get a bunch of different answers to this, but we did this workshop a few weeks ago, and we had folks from major large companies that were there, and this question came up. I would say that, folks who are just entering the work field, or excuse me, the workforce, have in certain ways a lot more advantages than somebody like me who's having, I'm an old dog who's got to learn a bunch of new tricks, right? You guys have an opportunity as a junior person to, you know, really focus on building that skill set so that when you walk in the door, you have, at least some knowledge of these technologies. And I would say, remember what I said about, AI is not going to take your job. It's the person who knows how to leverage AI better than you who will take your job. So what is it that you can learn, and what is it that you can, what kind of tools can you mess around with? And I would say, and I think you said in like software engineering, but if it's some kind of discipline, learn what AI tools are commonly used in that field and what kind of problems are getting solved with that, and then learn what you can about those tools, and you'll be able to market yourself, I would say, a lot better than somebody who didn't. And I'll state too that I do a lot of hiring and whatnot, and I think there's also a fear that if you say, I use AI, that you'll be shamed or you wouldn't be considered for a job. And, there's probably jobs out there, but I might argue that, again, is that the kind of job you want? I would say that, I encourage my staff to use these AI tools because they're going to be able to get these things done faster and, can focus on other things.
Awesome. Thank you so much. There's an anonymous question that ties into that very well, actually. Specifically, what sorts of skills should the next generation focus on in developing to maintain relevancy for things like this?
Yeah, I mean, I think I was talking about this with some folks last week. It kind of, in my opinion, it can kind of depend on what your goals are. But, if you're a scientist who's wanting to apply AI to your discipline in whatever form that means, again, I would say get familiar with what people are using, what tools are people using in your field. Are they using, you know, Anthropic? Are they using ChatGPT or whatever it is that they're using? Is it, so figure that out first and then learn what you can about those tools and how to use them and leverage them. If you're somebody who's thinking about being a system administrator or somebody who's really interested in working behind the scenes on the infrastructure, learn what you can about GPUs and sustainability and the amount of electricity and power and cooling and all of these things that are, having to power the compute underneath the hood for these models. And if you're, somebody who's interested in helping develop theory and developing these AI models and, how and helping improve how these systems are making decisions, that's a computer science, that you should really get interested in computer science and learning the theory behind it. Um, I think again, I would say that there's so many tools out there that you can just kind of play around with, and I would spend time playing around with them.
Perfect. We have two more questions. We've got a question from Maddie. If LLMs make intelligence ubiquitous and inexpensive, even though compatibility and environmentally it's expensive, does the most important skill shift to being able to evaluate and discern effectively?
That's a really good question. I mean, I think that, again, this is just my opinion, but I would say that, you know, there's there are a lot of people out there who are thinking about the sustainability issue and therefore um how to make sure that we're using these systems the most efficiently so that we aren't using so much power. I think this is kind of what your question is. And then there's people who are just feverishly trying to learn the technology and get their job done, whatever that looks like. I think that it kind of depends on, in terms of a job, it kind of depends on the company or the institution's values. And I'll say that, I've worked in the public sector for 20 years now, and I've worked with people who use cyber infrastructure systems, and everybody is so busy. They are primarily interested, and they feel a lot of pressure. They are primarily interested in getting the job done as quickly and as correctly as they can. Now, I'm not saying this is the right way to go about this. And I definitely, in fact, I'll say that it is not the right way to go about this for so many reasons that are related to sustainability and not. For example, if you have folks who are running code that's like wholly inefficient on a system, it costs money to do that, and it prevents other users or other researchers from being able to get done what they need to get done because your code is looping through in an inefficient manner. But at the same time, without some kind of major stronghold in place to force that issue, that's kind of the default to where people go. I think personally, if you're the kind of person that can understand how to make these things most efficient and and to do that in a way that is effective and incentivizing for the people that will be leveraging these systems. I think that you've tapped into the trifecta of perfect in terms of what skill sets you should have as an individual. I don't know if that helps or if that answers your question.
Fantastic. We do have another question. This is from Anonymous. How can we make sure that decisions about AI development include everyday people, not just tech companies and governments? Is there something that I can do as a student?
That's a hard question.
Hmm.
Um,
They do specify that they are at CU. They are a
yeah,
CU student.
that didn't make it easier. I mean, it is one thing for me to get up here and say, well, you should do these things to mitigate the risks. And then it's another thing to, feel like you're a cog in a wheel that's way bigger than you. Um, Here's what I'll say, and maybe this is a, a utopic answer, but I'll give it anyway. I think get involved in as many things as you can and ask questions about the data and the answers that you're seeing and ask them publicly, because when you do that, it makes people think about it. And I'll give you an example. Again, when I was giving this talk 2 weeks ago, somebody spoke up about bias and, certain concerns about the bias. And we had, I don't remember how long it was, but we had a lengthy conversation about that. And, that I'm positive got people thinking about some things that they weren't necessarily thinking about. So, you know, go to AI talks, listen, learn, ask questions, challenge assumptions. What I would say too is that, you can bury your head in the sand and try to pretend that this isn't here. But I really think that folks who are good and folks who have good intentions, they're the ones that are going to change the trajectory of AI and make it better. So, you know, go to the big companies and, become an AI expert and think about the biases that are inherent in the data. Go to college, college and learn about the theory and make it better. Apply for or not apply for what's the word I'm looking for? Like talk to your congress people and your representatives. That's the word I'm looking for. To let them know that hey, these things are concerning. But again, those are perhaps easy answers to give. I think day to day, again, it's just learn as much as you can and try to keep your eye on the bigger picture, I guess I would say.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much again, Shelley. We are at time. This was a fantastic presentation. We'd
Thank
also
you
like
for
to
having me.
thank, absolutely. We'd like to thank you. We'd like to thank our attendees who joined us today. And we want to let everyone know that we have one or two of these webinars pretty much every month. So please stand by, look at your emails for our Access and NAIR websites as well for upcoming webinars. And we're really excited to continue sharing these with everyone moving forward. Thank you so much and have a good one, everyone.